Overthinking is not a personality trait. It is not intelligence, and it is not depth. It is hesitation wearing the mask of thought. And the modern world has trained you to confuse constant mental noise with wisdom. But the silent samurai understood something long before neuroscience confirmed it, that the mind becomes weakest when it never stops talking, because every unnecessary thought drains energy that should have been used for action. And the reason you feel exhausted, even when you haven't moved, is because your brain has been fighting battles that never existed, replaying conversations, imagining failures, predicting rejection, rehearsing pain in advance, and calling it preparation, when in reality it is fear stretched out over time. Fear that never reaches resolution because no action ever follows it. And this is why two people can face the same challenge, and one moves forward effortlessly while the other freezes. Not because one is braver, but because one has mastered the flow state, while the other is trapped in the prison of analysis. And if you want to stop overthinking, you must first understand why the mind clings to it. Because the mind believes that thinking more will eventually create certainty, but certainty is an illusion. No warrior ever entered battle with full certainty, yet they entered anyway. And the samurai knew that clarity is born from motion, not from rumination, which is why their training focused on silence, discipline, and immediate engagement with reality instead of endless deliberation. Because the longer the blade stays in its sheath, the heavier it feels. But once drawn, it moves naturally. And this is how your mind works too. When left idle, it stiffens. But once engaged in decisive action, it becomes fluid, responsive, and quiet. And modern psychology now describes this as flow, a mental state where attention narrows, doubt disappears, and the sense of self dissolves. But what they rarely tell you is that flow is not something you wait for. It is something you enter by obeying a simple rule the samurai lived by. Move first, think second. Because thought without movement decays into anxiety. And this is why you overthink simple decisions, but rarely overthink emergencies. Because urgency forces action, and action forces presence, and presence dissolves doubt. Yet instead of creating artificial urgency through action, most people try to think their way into confidence, which never works, because confidence is the byproduct of movement aligned with purpose, not mental rehearsal. And the silent samurai flow method begins by accepting that your mind is not meant to be a commander, it is meant to be a tool. And when the tool starts giving orders, chaos follows. Because the mind cannot differentiate between imagined danger and real danger, so it treats every possibility as a threat, keeping you in a constant low-level survival state, which manifests as hesitation, procrastination, and fatigue. And once you see this clearly, you stop asking how to stop overthinking and start asking a better question. How do I move despite the noise? And the answer is not to silence the mind, because trying to silence it only gives it more attention. The samurai did not try to stop thoughts, they trained attention. And attention is directional. Where it goes, energy follows. So the first discipline of flow is choosing a physical anchor, something tangible that grounds you in the present moment, because the mind loses its grip when the body takes the lead, whether it is walking, breathing deeply, tightening your grip, or focusing on a single repetitive action. The body becomes the gateway out of mental loops. And this is why overthinking intensifies when you are sedentary and weakens when you move with intention. And once the body anchors you, the second discipline activates, reduction. Because flow is not about adding techniques, but removing interference. Removing distractions, removing choices, removing excess goals. Because complexity feeds overthinking and simplicity starves it. The samurai did not carry 10 weapons into battle. They mastered one blade. And modern life overwhelms you, not because it is hard, but because you allow too many open loops in your mind, unfinished tasks, unclear priorities, and undefined commitments.
each one pulling attention in a different direction, fragmenting focus, and training your brain to stay in uncertainty. So the silent samurai flow method demands that at any given moment you choose one action that moves you forward and ignore the rest. Because progress does not require perfection, it requires direction, and direction collapses doubt. And this is why people who flow appear calm even under pressure, because they are not trying to manage everything. They are fully committed to the next step only. And commitment is the antidote to rumination, not reassurance, because reassurance fades, but commitment stabilizes. And once you commit, the mind follows, reluctantly at first, but eventually willingly, because the mind seeks alignment, and when action and attention align, flow emerges naturally. And this is also why perfectionism is just overthinking disguised as high standards, because perfectionism delays action until certainty is achieved, which never comes, whereas mastery is built through repeated imperfect execution. And the samurai trained through repetition, not contemplation, drilling the same movement until it became instinctive so that thought no longer interfered during execution. And your life requires the same principle. You cannot think your way into clarity. You must act your way into it, because clarity is not the cause of action, it is the result of it. And once this truth is internalized, overthinking loses its authority because you no longer treat thoughts as commands. You treat them as background noise while you execute what matters. And execution rewires the brain faster than analysis ever could, strengthening neural pathways associated with confidence, presence, and decisiveness, while weakening the circuits responsible for doubt and hesitation. And when this happens repeatedly, flow stops being rare and starts becoming your default state, not because life becomes easier, but because resistance disappears. And resistance is what drains you, not effort. Effort, aligned with purpose, energizes, while effort spent fighting imagined threats depletes. And this is why some people grow sharper under pressure while others collapse. The difference is not resilience, but relationship with thought. And the silent samurai does not obey every thought. They observe it, acknowledge it, and return to the blade in their hands, to the step beneath their feet, to the breath moving in and out, grounding awareness in what is real instead of what is imagined. And once you shift from living in hypothetical futures to engaging with the present task, anxiety dissolves, not because problems disappear, but because you are finally meeting reality, instead of running simulations of it. And this is the heart of flow, total engagement without self-interference. And it is accessible to anyone willing to stop negotiating with hesitation and start moving despite discomfort. Because discomfort is not a warning, it is a threshold. And on the other side of that threshold lies momentum. And momentum silences the mind more effectively than any meditation technique, because movement creates evidence, and evidence quiets fear. And the samurai knew this long before it was measured, which is why they walked calmly into uncertainty with full presence, not because they lacked fear, but because they understood that fear loses power when it is faced directly through action rather than entertained endlessly through thought. And this is where the first part of the silent samurai flow method culminates, in the realization that overthinking is not solved by more thinking, but by training yourself to act with discipline even when clarity is incomplete, because clarity follows courage, not the other way around.
Once you understand that flow begins with action rather than analysis, the next step is to make this state sustainable. Because anyone can experience brief moments of flow, but the silent samurai was trained to live there, not as an emotional high, but as a disciplined way of being. And the key difference between occasional flow and consistent flow is structure. Because without structure, momentum fades and overthinking slowly creeps back in, filling the gaps left by indecision. So the samurai designed their lives to minimize mental friction, and you must do the same if you want to stop overthinking permanently. starting with the realization that every decision you postpone becomes a mental burden, draining attention even when you were not consciously thinking about it. Which is why reducing decisions is not laziness, but mastery, because cognitive energy is finite, and wasting it on trivial choices leaves none for meaningful action. And this is why disciplined routines outperform motivation every time, because routines remove the need to decide, and when the need to decide disappears, so does most overthinking. And the silent samurai flow method therefore demands that you pre-decide as much as possible. When you wake up, how you train, when you work, what your non-negotiables are. Because when the structure is set in advance, the mind has nothing to argue about, and argument is what fuels overthinking. Because the mind thrives on unresolved conflict, both internal and external. And as long as your boundaries are soft and your commitments vague, the mind will keep looping, searching for certainty. But once you define rules and honor them regardless of mood, the mind adapts, because it craves consistency more than comfort. And this is also why emotional discipline is essential for flow, because emotions are transient states, not reliable guides. And if you wait to feel ready before acting, you will remain stuck forever. Whereas if you act according to a code instead of a feeling, emotions eventually align with behavior, not the other way around. And the samurai lived by codes, not because they were rigid, but because they understood that freedom emerges from discipline. Because discipline removes the chaos of internal negotiation, replacing it with decisive clarity. And with clarity, flow becomes accessible on demand, not by forcing it, but by eliminating the conditions that prevent it, such as distraction, unresolved goals, and emotional dependence on outcomes. And this is another crucial point. Flow requires detachment from results, because attachment creates tension, and tension pulls attention away from the present moment into imagined futures, feeding overthinking again. And the samurai trained to act fully without clinging to success or fearing failure, because clinging fractures presence, while detachment sharpens it. And this does not mean indifference, it means engagement without obsession. Because obsession narrows perspective, while focused engagement broadens awareness. And when awareness expands, thought slows down naturally, because there is no longer a need to control everything mentally. And this is why athletes, artists, and warriors all describe flow as effortless, not because the task is easy, but because resistance disappears. And resistance is always created by the mind's attempt to dominate reality instead of cooperate with it. And cooperation with reality begins by accepting uncertainty rather than fighting it. Because uncertainty is not a flaw in life, it is the foundation of movement. And if everything were certain, there would be nothing to act on, no challenge to engage, no growth to pursue. And this acceptance dissolves the false belief that you must eliminate doubt before moving forward, which is the root of chronic overthinking. Because doubt is not a signal to stop, it is a signal to proceed carefully, attentively, and with presence. And when you treat doubt as information rather than obstruction, it loses its power to paralyze you, and instead sharpens your awareness, making your actions more precise, more intentional, and more aligned. And this is the deeper layer of the silent samurai flow method, transforming fear from an enemy into a guide. Because fear highlights what matters, and what matters is where focus belongs, not avoidance. And when fear is acknowledged but not obeyed, it fades into the background, no longer dominating attention, allowing flow to take over. And this is also why solitude plays a critical role in sustaining flow, because constant external input fragments attention, training the mind to jump from stimulus to stimulus, weakening its ability to remain present with a single task. And the samurai valued silence not as escape, but as training the nervous system to tolerate stillness without seeking distraction. Because a nervous system addicted to stimulation cannot enter flow voluntarily. It requires chaos to feel alive. While a trained nervous system can generate intensity through focus alone, and this is what separates shallow engagement from deep immersion. And if you want flow to become natural, you must reduce unnecessary input, limit noise, scroll less, consume with intention.
Because every piece of content you consume trains your attention either toward depth or fragmentation, and fragmentation feeds overthinking while depth dissolves it. And this training must be consistent, because flow is not a hack, it is a cultivated state, built through daily alignment between action, values, and discipline. And once aligned, effort becomes lighter even when challenges increase, because internal resistance is gone. And this is why the silent samurai could remain calm in chaos, because chaos existed outside, not inside. And inner order creates outer effectiveness, while inner chaos undermines even the best opportunities. And this brings us to the final element of the method: trust. Because flow requires trust in your training, trust in your preparation, and trust in your ability to adapt in real time. And overthinking is ultimately a lack of trust in oneself, a belief that more thinking will compensate for perceived inadequacy. But competence is built through execution, not speculation, and confidence grows from evidence, not reassurance. And every time you act despite doubt, you create evidence that weakens the habit of overthinking while strengthening the identity of someone who moves. And identity shapes behavior more than effort ever could. Because once you see yourself as someone who acts, hesitation feels unnatural, and flow becomes familiar territory, not an occasional accident. And at this stage, the mind no longer dominates experience, it supports it, providing information when needed and fading into silence when not, like a well-trained tool rather than an unruly master. And this is the ultimate expression of the silent samurai flow method, living with decisive presence, grounded in action, disciplined by structure, detached from outcomes, focused through simplicity, and strengthened by trust. Not because overthinking disappears entirely, but because it no longer controls your direction. And when thought loses control, movement takes over. And when movement is aligned, life begins to flow naturally. Not because resistance disappears from the world, but because resistance disappears from within. And that is when clarity, power, and peace converge into one state, the state the samurai lived in, and the state you can enter anytime you choose to move instead of hesitate.
Flow is not an escape from life. It is a return to the way life was meant to be lived. And once you step into this state consistently, something unexpected begins to happen. Something the samurai described as the quiet awakening. A shift where your mind stops behaving like a frantic master and becomes a disciplined servant, responding only when called upon instead of interfering constantly. And this shift doesn't happen with force or intensity. It happens slowly, subtly, through repetition, through daily alignment with your actions. And as you train yourself to move without hesitation, your relationship with time transforms entirely. Because overthinking stretches time into an endless grid of imaginary scenarios, where flow compresses time into presence, where minutes feel deep and hours feel effortless. And this depth of time is something modern people rarely experience because their attention is fragmented into shallow pieces, constantly split between past regrets and future anxieties. But when you enter flow, all fragmentation disappears and your perception sharpens into a single beam of energy aimed at only one task. And in that beam, fear dissolves, doubt weakens, and hesitation cannot survive. Because hesitation requires the mind to split itself between multiple possibilities, while flow allows only one possibility, the one you are acting on right now. And this is why flow feels peaceful even when the action itself is intense, because inner conflict is gone. And the absence of inner conflict is the deepest form of peace, deeper than comfort, deeper than rest, deeper than pleasure. And the samurai cultivated this peace not by avoiding life, but by engaging them completely. Because true peace is not the absence of obstacles, but the absence of internal resistance to obstacles.
And when inner resistance is gone, life becomes a series of movements instead of a series of fears. And this makes you powerful not because you dominate others, but because you dominate yourself. And the man who dominates himself cannot be dominated by anything outside him. And this is the strength overthinkers never access, because overthinking hands control over your inner world to external circumstances, letting imagined outcomes dictate your behavior. Whereas flow reclaims that control by focusing on what you can do now. And the moment you shift attention to the present, external forces lose their grip, because the present moment is the only place where you have agency. And agency is the antidote to anxiety, because anxiety is the tension between what you want to control and what you actually can control. And the farther your thoughts drift into hypothetical futures, the worse this tension becomes, creating a state of mental paralysis that feels like thinking, but is actually fear. And the samurai never allowed their attention to drift far from the present, because they knew the present is where strength lives. And this doesn't mean ignoring the future. It means planning once and acting many times. Because the future is shaped by consistent present action, not by constant future analysis. And once you internalize this principle, your productivity skyrockets, not because you are working harder, but because you are working without friction, without the wasted energy of doubt. And this makes your actions cleaner, sharper, and more effective. And soon you realize something profound. Most of your suffering came not from life, but from the stories your mind told about life. Stories of danger, judgment, failure, humiliation, and loss that never actually happened. And when you remove these stories, what remains is simply the task at hand. And tasks can always be managed, but imaginary futures cannot. And as flow deepens, you begin to understand why the samurai valued simplicity above everything else. Because complexity multiplies mental noise, while simplicity amplifies clarity. And clarity is the foundation of decisive action. And decisive action is the foundation of power. And power is not control over others, but control over yourself. And once you taste this control, overthinking becomes foreign to you, a distant echo from a past life where your mind dictated your actions instead of supporting them. And as this transformation continues, you begin to notice that the world responds differently to you, because people instinctively trust those who act without hesitation, follow those who move with clarity, and respect those who do not negotiate with self-doubt. And this is not because they see you as perfect, but because they sense that you are present. And presence is the rarest form of authority. Because present tells the world, I am here fully. And most people are never fully anywhere. And when you are fully present, your words carry weight, your decisions carry conviction, and your silence carries strength. And ironically, the more you enter flow, the quieter you become internally and externally, because you no longer seek validation to quiet your mind. Your mind is already quiet because it is aligned, and alignment is what creates inner stillness. And inner stillness is what the samurai spent their lives cultivating, not by avoiding life, but by moving through it with awareness. And this awareness is not mystical, it is practical. It is the awareness of your breath, your posture, your intention, your direction, your next step. And when all of these align, you stop feeling fragmented and start feeling whole. And the whole person doesn't overthink, because overthinking is a symptom of fragmentation, the result of too many desires, too many fears, too many imagined futures pulling you apart. But a whole person moves in one direction with one intention at a time. And this is why flow feels like power, because power is unity. Unity of thought, action, and purpose.
And once you reach this unity, your life begins to reshape itself around your new identity, because your actions become consistent, your discipline becomes natural, your habits become automatic, and your results compound faster than ever before, creating a positive feedback loop where action leads to confidence, confidence leads to action, and this cycle replaces the old loop of doubt leading to hesitation, hesitation leading to doubt. And breaking this loop is the heart of the silent samurai training. Because once broken, the mind no longer defaults to fear, it defaults to movement, and movement creates momentum, and momentum becomes identity, and identity becomes destiny. And this is why mastering flow is not just a mental upgrade, it is a life upgrade. A transformation that reshapes every part of your existence from the inside out, turning hesitation into decisiveness, noise into clarity, fragmentation into unity, and anxiety into presence. And once presence becomes your normal state, life stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling directed. Not because chaos disappears, but because you are no longer affected by it internally. And that is the moment you truly begin to live like a silent samurai.
To continue mastering the silent samurai flow method, you must understand one final truth. Flow is not something you chase. It is something you return to again and again, like a warrior sharpening his blade every morning. Because no matter how skilled he becomes, the blade dulls if neglected. And the same is true for your mind. Because your mind naturally drifts toward noise, distraction, and fear unless it is trained consistently. And training does not require harsh discipline or endless effort. It requires repetition, simplicity, and intention. The same principles that shaped the samurai across centuries. And the first repetition you must engrave into your life is the habit of beginning. Because most suffering comes not from doing a task, but from avoiding the start of it. And beginning is the small hinge that moves the great door of destiny. Because once you start, hesitation weakens. Once you start, fear shrinks. Once you start, clarity emerges. And this is why the silent samurai never delayed the first step, because the first step decides everything, and once it is taken, the rest unfolds naturally. And to make beginning easier, you must design your environment to support flow instead of sabotage it, removing unnecessary clutter, reducing sensory noise, and tailoring your surroundings to trigger the mental state you want. Because your environment is always training you whether you realize it or not. And a chaotic environment trains a chaotic mind, while a clean and intentional environment trains a focused mind. And once your environment supports your flow, the next step is mastering your breath, because breath is the bridge between body and mind. And the samurai used breathwork before every battle, every decision, and every high-stakes moment. Not as spirituality, but as strategy, because deep breathing slows mental noise and brings attention back to the present. And the present moment is where flow lives. And this is why the silent samurai flow method treats breath as the reset button, the way to return to clarity instantly, even in the middle of overwhelm. And once breath becomes your ally, you gain access to something even more powerful, the ability to interrupt overthinking in real time, noticing when your thoughts begin spiraling and cutting the spiral at its root by returning to the body, to breath, to action. Because interrupting a pattern weakens it over time, and weak patterns eventually die. And the pattern of overthinking dies the moment you refuse to feed it with attention. Because the mind cannot sustain loops without your energy. And when you repeatedly withdraw energy from doubt and redirect it into action, doubt withers while confidence grows. And confidence is not something you wait for. It is something you build through thousands of small executions, each one sending a signal to your brain that you are capable. And capability becomes identity. And identity shapes destiny. And once you begin thinking like a samurai, acting like a samurai, and moving like a samurai, overthinking cannot coexist with your new identity, because a samurai does not entertain unnecessary thoughts. He entertains necessary actions. And the more you act in alignment with this identity, the more natural flow becomes, until eventually you start experiencing long periods of heightened focus, creativity and calm without effort, because your mind has learned that this is your new default state. And reaching this level does not make life easier, it makes you stronger. And strength changes your entire experience of life, because challenges stop feeling threatening and start feeling like opportunities to engage. And obstacles stop creating fear and start creating interest. And fear itself transforms from a reason to stop into a doorway to step through. And once you step through enough doorways, your courage compounds, your discipline expands, and your flow deepens, until hesitation becomes a memory from a former life, a life where you let imagined futures dictate your actions. But now you dictate your actions, and your actions dictate your reality. And your reality reflects your internal mastery. And this mastery is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is silent, like the samurai who walked with stillness even when the world around him was chaotic. Because stillness is not the absence of movement, it is the absence of internal conflict. And when you reach this level of inner stillness, you stop being at war with yourself. And once the internal war ends, the external world becomes easier to navigate, because you are no longer fighting on two fronts. And this makes your decisions sharper, your actions cleaner, your presence stronger. And soon people around you begin to notice that you move differently, speak differently, and carry yourself with a kind of quiet confidence that cannot be faked. A confidence born from inner coherence and disciplined action. And this is where your life enters a new chapter. One where you no longer hope for flow, but create it. No longer wait for confidence, but build it. No longer fear uncertainty, but walk through it with calm authority. And this is the final gift of the Silent Samurai Flow method. Not a technique, not a trick, but a transformation. A shift from being controlled by your mind to using your mind as a precise tool. From living in hesitations to living in decisive movements. From overthinking to flowing. From fragmentation to wholeness. And once you reach this wholeness, everything in your life changes. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become unshakable. And an unshakable mind is the greatest weapon a modern warrior can possess.